Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for the second workshop of the Gender Equality, Disability and Social Inclusion, or GEDSI, Sensitive Urban Climate Action e-learning module. Quite a mouthful. My name is Amelia Leavesley. I'm here on behalf of the University of Melbourne and I will be the MC for today's session. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. I ask that you kindly keep your camera and microphone turned off unless you are speaking. You're welcome to use the chat function to introduce yourself, share reflections, and make pertinent comments. We will introduce a dedicated space for posing questions, which I'll talk about in a minute. We have simultaneous interpretation for this session, English Thai and Thai English. For those of you who would like to avail themselves, please select the Thai channel. We will also have simultaneous international sign language interpretation. Live captioning should also be enabled. Please note that this session will be recorded, including through graphics for documentation purposes. Okay, here is our agenda for today. We will start with a quick recap of workshop 1 and the results from the homework quiz, which you should all have now completed. Next, we will have one city panel and a feedback session, which I'll introduce in a moment. Then we'll have an open discussion where I encourage all of you to post questions and comments before our final wrap up and next steps. Today, we are using Miro to guide our discussion. You can access the program using the QR code here on the screen or the link in the chat. You can add comments and questions either via the Q&A function on Zoom or by posting a new sticky note on the Miro questions bay, which is the big yellow box you can see on the right there. I encourage all of you now to use the Miro link, which my colleague Sarah will post in the chat in a moment, and make sure that you're familiar with using this program. I also note that we will be addressing questions from the last workshop during the open discussion session. But if you have any new questions, please feel free to add them to the Miro board. And I see Sarah, thank you very much, has just put them in the chat. So please use this link to post your questions. Right, before we get into the agenda today, I would like to begin with a recap. In workshop 1, we covered the basic principles of GEDSI, which you can see here on the screen. We also covered the 4R method, which you can also now see on the screen. I won't go into these in detail, but just a very quick recap. We also heard from our wonderful panel of experts who join us again today. In workshop 1, they shared their reflections on how cities can address inequalities and facilitate inclusive urban planning. Today, we'll be flipping that format and have the experts respond to our cities and further share their reflections on how our city participants were able to address inequalities using the 4R method. To help you better understand these principles of GEDSI and the 4R method, we asked you to complete an online quiz. In this quiz, you were asked to help the hypothetical city of Po to address GEDSI aspects in one of 2 projects. You had the choice of either an electric bus service upgrade or a water-sensitive park upgrade. And here are the results. Thank you to the 27 people who completed the quiz. Most of you, as you can see on the screen, chose to address the water-sensitive park upgrade. We reviewed the interventions that you chose to make to the bus service to make the bus service or the park more inclusive. For the bus service, people chose to change the bus fare price, for example, introduce concession rates, increase the service area, or purchase accessible vehicles. Other interventions could include improving the signage, changing the bus schedules themselves, including free transit and many others. For the park upgrade, you primarily focused on physical interventions, including more shelter, accessible pathways, lighting, and seating. But we had lots of wonderful additional suggestions to improve access and inclusivity in the park, including genuine engagement with community and local partners, universal accessibility, awareness and education, additional amenities, staff training, tree planting, and the list goes on. Thank you to everyone who took the time to complete this activity. We hope that it was a fulfilling exercise. For those who've not yet had a chance to complete the quiz, it will remain open for the rest of the month. I encourage you to take the time after this webinar to complete the survey. Right, now on to today's workshop. Today, we are flipping the format from last workshop, and we'll hear from 3 representatives from Thailand, India, and Indonesia. These cities will present how they addressed GEDSI aspects using the 4R method to help tackle an urban climate problem in their city. These presentations will demonstrate how we can use the 4R method to improve inclusivity in urban climate projects. Today, our city representatives will present their projects to our lovely panel of experts and to you, our wonderful audience. I will now hand over to Ting Ting Chen, who will moderate the city panels. Over to you, Ting Ting.
Thank you, Amelia. I hope I'm well audible. It's my pleasure to facilitate presentations from the city representatives. As Amelia has already mentioned, we'll first hear from all 3 representatives from Thailand, India, and Indonesia, and then we'll receive comments and feedbacks from our panel of experts. The first presenter will be Ms. Sawapak Tamasan, Senior Sanitation Researcher from Hayat City Municipality, Thailand, who will speak about GEDSI considerations in the city's waste management projects. Without further ado, let me give the floor to Ms. Tamasan. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I would like to present about the pre-feasibility study for an integrated resource recovery center in Hat Yai City Municipality. Our project goal is to find a sustainable solution for our city. We want to shift from own collect and dispose model to a circular resource recovery model. Currently, Hat Yai faces a major challenge. Our own waste-to-energy plant failed, and we now have waste about 50 kilometers away. This has led to high costs and public complaints. This project aims to change that by reforming the entire system. Next, please. And first, we must recognize the key group of people involved. Our first group is about 140 residents in our city. While everyone is impacted, those in dense urban areas are disproportionately affected by poor waste management. Second, the informal recycling sector, which includes junk shop owners and informal collectors who lack formal support from us. Third, our waste management workers, like truck drivers who face risk from protests. And finally, our community leaders. They are vital and have already shown success in grassroots waste management. Recognizing this group is the first step to creating an inclusive solution. Next, please. And next, we look at how resources are distributed. In terms of technology and infrastructure, resources are very limited. Public bins were removed, and the municipality about waste-to-energy plant and collection trucks are inefficient. Financially, the situation is unbalanced. The municipality had insufficient revenue due to a free waiver, while paying incredibly high operation costs of around more than 1,000 baht per ton, is that only for transport. However, we do have strong social resources. Successful community-led programs show us that the local know-how is there, but is underutilized. Next, please. And this brings us to represent the answer like in past policy and governance failures. The waste-to-energy plan failed due to a legal issue and unsustainable technology. A political decision to where we created our financial crisis. And we also have external factors at play, such as a past security concern that linked learn to removing public means and ongoing jurisdictional conflict with neighboring community. And this deep-rooted issue explain why the current system is failing. And next, please. Finally, we come to reform. We must ask, why not shape policy to fix this? Our project will integrate GEDSI principle to create a truly equitable system. The first one, we will propose inclusive policy by formally integrating the informal recycling sector and introducing a fair fee structure. Second one, we will promote community participation using successful local programs as a blueprint and ensuring that community leaders have a voice in our new project. And by ensuring environmental and social justice, the new IRRC program will have strong safeguards to protect community. By doing so, we can create a sustainable and fair system for everyone in Hat Yai. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Tamasan. I'm sure our experts will be jotting down some comments in Miro about your presentation. We'll check them out later and delve a bit more into your project during the feedback session. Now let me turn to India. The next presentation will be about water management in Panaji city of India, and we'll have two co-presenters, Ms. Manali Gah, urban planner from the Corporation of the City of Panaji, and Mr. Dennis Days Thomas, urban planning consultant from GIZ India. Over to both of you for the next 5 minutes.
Hello everyone, this is Manali. So our project is hybrid nature-based solution for stormwater management. Panji, being the capital city of Goa, faces recurring monsoon waterlogging issue, and the most vulnerable and affected people are women, person with disability, elderly individual, and low-income group. Women face significant challenges in mobility and safety during waterlogged conditions, and persons with disability often find it nearly impossible to move around. Many vulnerable families live in informal settlements where water frequently enters their home, damaging their possessions and increasing exposure to disease. So, further, I'll hand it over to Dennis.
Hi everyone, Dennis. From this section, I'll be taking on from GEDSI requirements. Can you just move on to the next slide, please? So, who are the users, the target groups? Our target groups were homemakers who really suffer in the homemaking, like they need to get some grocery items, or they need to look after the children during the flooding. They're really affected with that, and working women who need to travel daily, make an hassle for them, and the person with disability who always are affected with that. And street vendors is one other such category who really lost their job during that time, and they are also infected during that time, and they need to spend more money on the healthcare, so they doesn't have income. Such a uh, pathetic situation for them. And obviously people living in slums, they also have such great issues. And why these people are affected majorly, like urban flooding, due to urban flooding, is like limited mobility for all of them and unequal access to resources, and all of them are like highly exposed to health risk, because if you know, like women during their menstrual cycles, they are highly infected during this time. And also these vendors, for example, vendors are also one of such categories highly exposed to healthcare, and also livelihood risk that they are facing. And the available resources for the city has a stormwater drains along the major roads in the city, and also they have a structured framework to maintain, which includes different government departments to maintain stormwater management drains. And the support from local authority was immense, and they have a good support. We got a good support, and also they also have a good dedicated stormwater management cell in the city, which composed of all the genders, PWDs, and also the legal provisions coming into. They have the city have formed an drain committee. Which consists of government officials, obviously, and also the retired government officials and residents of the city, representatives from the city. So these are, and also city under the City of Panjim Corporation of 2002, they have set up Women and Child Welfare Committee and Public Health Committee established. So can you move on to the next slide, please? So coming on to how we have made our project inclusive. Urban flooding is one of the urban flooding one of the key issue in the city, and urban flooding hotspots were identified through consultation with stakeholders like local authority, obviously, and residents, including women, person with disabilities, and other vulnerable population were taken into account, and we have made sure that this planning of this whole procedures was done accordingly of this urban hotspot. And we also conducted a household level survey to identify how different section of the society was affected, like women, person with disability, or people living in slum, vendors, and other vulnerable groups are affected. And this helped us to capture localized knowledge, identify specific problematic area, and integrate that into our planning procedures. Based on this identified hotspot, we have tailored concept to solutions such as improved drainage system and blue-green infrastructure, hybrid nature-based solutions. And this concept are designed to address root cause of the flooding while enhancing climate resilience. So we have given a special attention to location of where these local marginalized, socially vulnerable people live, because they are the people who are disproportionately affected by this urban flooding. And also this whole of our procedures and process were designed in such a in a participatory approach, where all the section of the society was included in the planning procedure, and all the voices of them were represented in our concepts. So that's it from my end and from the city. Thank you.
Thank you both so much, Ms. Gan and Mr. Thomas. Very interesting project from India. And I think from my perspective, you've done a pretty good profiling of the GEDSI concerned population groups. And I also saw that the experts from the panel have already started to leave comments in terms of what questions you may pose for yourself in order to improve GEDSI analysis. We'll definitely check into that later on during the feedback session. And the next presentation will be from Indonesia. We'll have Ibu Mona Irawati Nasti, who works as a social worker and a policy analyst for the social rehabilitation of persons with disabilities at the Social Agency Indonesia. She will talk about inclusive development in Padang City, Indonesia. Let me know, Ibu Mona, if you're ready to speak.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I can presentation my presentation just now. My name is Mona Irawati Nasti. I'm civil servant in social worker Padang City. My project rationale inclusive development in Padang City, in line with the objective of SDGs, namely the fulfillment of quality human rights and fair and fair manner. The Padang City government need to provide inclusive education service, employment service, health service, and public service as follows. Preparation or planning and budgeting the responsive and accommodating to vulnerable groups, implementation of basic and public service that the friendly, especially for persons with disability, children, and the elderly. But opportunities broad opportunities for participation in livelihoods and improving the welfare of vulnerable groups, the qualities of inclusive employment. Next. GEDSI recommend for our method. Person with disability, elderly, children, and social vulnerable women. Available risk scores. State budget Indonesian, anggaran pendapatan belanja negara. Regional local government budget Indonesian, anggaran pendapatan belanja daerah. Next, CSR, corporate social responsibility, and Basnas, National Zakat Board Indonesia, Badan Amil Zakat Nasional. Why does this group be affected? Construction of government building facilities, the are currently operation 2% with disabilities, the elderly, children, and women. Available to budget allocation for capacity building, troop training, business support, effective the 5 food nutrition and referral. Implementation of commitment and cooperation with stakeholder improving service and independent of vulnerable groups. Why not? What are the legal provision? My Padang City have regional regulation number 1 of 2020. 25 protective and fulfillment of the right of person with disability and regional regulation number 1 of 2012 of on the handling of street children, homeless people, because of the street vendors. Next. Padang City Government Strategy of Inclusive Development, raising inclusive city based on Padang City Vision 2025 for 2030, mobilizing all potential of make Padang smart city and hard city foundation and region and culture toward and advancement of previous city, involving an element to social, including process with disability in the planning of inclusive development in Padang City. Developing disability friendly, elderly, and child friendly and woman friendly areas in Padang City, empowering specific communities, person with disabilities, advocates, and NGO in various activities in Padang City. Optimizing stakeholder involvement, CSR, Basnas, and in expanding the reach of service for developing self-reliance and welfare of vulnerable groups. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ibu Mona, and also all the previous presenters. For each of the presentations, I believe you could have unpacked a lot more interesting details if there were more time. Let's see if we could touch upon some additional details and discussion during the feedback session. And also, there is another open floor discussion session that would involve everyone after the feedback session. So now on to the feedback session. Excuse me. All right. For the interest of time, I'll first quickly summarize the comments from experts on each presentation, following the 4R framework. And then I will invite 1 or 2 experts to elaborate a bit further on any interesting points touched upon in relation to each of the projects presented. Today we'll have the same 5 experts from whom you've heard from in the previous workshop. They are Ms. Astri Haas, Independent Families Urban Economist, Dr. Anjali Agarwal, Co-founder and Executive Director from Samathian, India, Mr. Abraham Aful, Senior Project Advisor from GIZ, Dr. Heather Allen, Senior Consultant on Gender and Sustainable Transport, and Ms. Michaela Lu Andrea Gadus, Urban Transition Analyst from the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities. For those of you who were there, I wouldn't need to introduce you further on their excellent profiles. May I ask my colleague to pull up the Miro board where our experts have placed comments? Lisa, may I have your help to present? Thank you. All right, it's coming up. I can tell that the screen is not quite readable. I will do my best to summarize as the comments, I believe, are still coming up. We'll first look at comments from the expert panel on the project on waste management in Hayat City of Thailand. Trying to read the screen. In terms of the first dimension related to representation, I think in the presentation, there are already some analysis in terms of the community stakeholders who would like to reach out to or engage in the projects. But some of these comments I can see on the screen are suggesting that you could potentially look further into the demographic profiling of these community members. For example, the residents and the household which family members usually are taking care of waste management in the household, for example, and also when it comes to informal waste collectors and also formal waste management workers who are most likely engaged in these sectors as workers. That will be the kind of profiling you would want to do in order to understanding further the GEDSI aspects of the stakeholders you will want to be represented in the process of the projects. One of the comments I can read as of now is, for example, I'm not sure who this is from. Maybe it's from Astrid. There are more specific suggestions. For example, in the context of your city projects,
Sorry, Ting Ting, just to clarify, I just put the question. I think the answer was then actually put in the comment itself. I just put the first line.
Okay, thank you. So maybe there's no need to refer to who placed comments. It's good that we have a rich commenting process showing up on the board. I think, as I mentioned earlier, it's good to understand further which population groups are most likely to engage in the different stakeholders you mentioned under representation in your analysis, including those, for example, women, youth, and also informal workers who they are. It's also mentioned that there might be workers engaged in the digital platforms like riders who could potentially be engaged in waste management and recycling programs as well. Also to acknowledge that when you analyze informal groups involved, it's likely that the profiling is quite fragmented. So that's where you would want to pay attention, thinking of the steps later on how to engage them in a better way. When it comes to resources, so far I can see one comment. And actually, I think it's a question. If there's no fee, how will affordability be affected once fees are put in place? So that's the kind of questions you probably want to consider upfront when you think of, especially when it comes to how to engage the GEDSI concerned groups, because cost is going to be a concern for individuals and households as well. On the reality, I haven't seen any comments so far. Maybe it will come up later. In terms of why not the legal provisions about relevant rights and what to do and what cannot be done, there is a suggestion that maybe it's necessary to look at something also relevant to waste management, which is about in the toilet facilities, the accessibility dimension and gender dimension that is something you can potentially also look into in addition to current policies and legal mandates. I believe later on when I invite experts to elaborate, we can understand further what these comments can potentially have a real impact in your project in Hyatt City. I'll stop here for the Thailand presentation for the time being, and let's move on to comments on the next presentation from Panaji City in India. Again, when it comes to representation, as I noted earlier, I think in your presentation, you've already done a pretty good profiling of the target groups or the population groups most likely be impacted by the stormwater flooding in the monsoon seasons. And the comments placed on the board as of now, it includes several key dimensions. One is how do you take into account children's views? I think that is a very legitimate concern, because usually it could be more challenging when it comes to consulting with children, and how to do that properly would be something you need to factor into your design. As you mentioned in your presentation, children are among the population groups whose health and living standards could be affected by flooding, especially and also how it affects the ability to go to school, for example. And then another comment about persons with different forms of disabilities, how you take them into account, including them in the consultation and action process. And I think there is already answer to that. Yes, they engage in stakeholder meetings, surveys, and planning procedures. And I think there could be more to be unpacked, how that process was done, not only to engage them in the design and the planning, but also in perhaps later on stages, like monitoring of new flooding spots, and how well the solutions put in place, for example, the drainage systems, are they continuing to be functioning, or how best to improve them, etc. So not only in the planning, but also the reporting and the monitoring of actions. And there is another comment, I believe, from Anjali, which is similar. So basically how to make sure that the different mechanisms for engaging the community in climate action include persons with different forms of disabilities, to acknowledge that the disability community is quite diverse as well. Under resources, it's also necessary to understand what resources are available out there to support actions tailored for the disability community, and in general for the GEDSI related solutions, how well and how can they be financed. There is also some more specific questions to consider the power dynamic in consultation or collaboration mechanisms, like in the community you mentioned, who are making decisions. That's how I understand, and how well the different groups are concerned by GEDSI analysis, women, persons with disabilities, older persons, children, how are they involved or not in the decision-making process, not just to be at the table, but also be able to voice and make decision. There is a very specific comment, I think it's very relevant to flooding projects, which is the emergency warning system. Are they engaged in the process and the design of your solution? And also, are there any measures such as temporary accessible shelters that can be provided to the most affected population during the floods? So these are the kind of questions you can basically ask to yourself when you do GEDSI analysis related to resources available that you can use to implement the projects. And on the reality, there is also, there are two comments. One is, I think it's important, the way I understand this comment is that it's not only necessary to know how many persons with disabilities, for example, are living in the neighborhoods you are implementing this project, but also to understand the realities, the barriers. This was mentioned in the previous workshop very well. So that in the analysis why and what are the conditions, why are they or are they not able to access support and so on, are also factoring the different GEDSI dimensions. For example, the facts and data you collected to answer the why question should also be disaggregated by gender and disability, as an example. And there is another comment about when you answer the why question, you also need to consider the other different sectors and services, public services that are affected by the flooding situation. And education is the example used here. Why children with disabilities, for example, are not able to go to school during flooding. That will help you make your analysis, the why question, more specific and collect more useful information for the design of your projects. And then the last dimension is about why not, the rights, the legal provisions. And here, Anjali suggested that there is a clear legal framework and including a specific act on persons with disabilities and their rights in India, and that established the foundation for non-discrimination and meaningful engagements in not only throughout policy-making, decision-making, planning, resources allocation, and implementation. I guess the question here is that how well this act and the relevant policies have been implemented in the flood management sector or the relevant urban planning sector. And then that will give you a clear idea how much you can leverage from the current legal framework in India to tailor and implement your projects. So that's about India. And let's move on to Indonesia. Thank you, Lisa, for making this easier for me. On Indonesia, we have received comments, first of all, in the dimension of representation who are affected. I think, again, in Indonesia's presentation, you have outlined pretty well the specific groups you like to target and engage in the design of the solution. And in your project is broader, it's inclusive development of the city. It covers more than one sectors. So it's even more important for you to look at how different groups have how their needs are differentiated when it comes to different services in different sector, and then it will give you a more detailed analysis of the situation and the stakeholders to be involved. When it comes to resources available, there is a question, I believe in Ibu Mona's presentation, you mentioned the city is planning to use CSR resources as part of the funding you can use, the resources you can use to implement the project. So how has it, or you think it can be used to finance your overall inclusive city development plan in Padang City? And how do you coordinate the different stakeholders into your project process? I think this is a very important question, given that you have more than one groups to engage in this process, and how to make sure you don't lose focus and priorities, but also it benefits everyone equally. It's not going to be an easy job. And the third comments in this dimension, it's also about financing, how you can use financing as a way to prioritize financing which part of the actions. For example, I believe something like inclusive city development in Padang City is not going to be a short-term project. It will be longer term, so prioritization will be even more important. When it comes to reality, there are two comments. One is to include in your analysis about GEDSI what factors, what factors, or how do you determine which areas should be inclusive? I think this question is most likely about which sectors you're going to prioritize in the city inclusive development planning. I think the expert who placed this question can perhaps clarify a little further. later on. And what would you consider the most difficult aspects of the project that might be useful for others to understand? I think this is a question we can perhaps invite Ibu Mona to respond to during the open floor discussion. And I don't see any comments under the rights dimension about the Indonesia case just yet. I think that's all I will have from the Miro board in terms of immediate comments and feedbacks for the 3 presentations. Checks. I think there is still enough time for us to invite experts to elaborate a little further to towards each of the presentations. Perhaps can I go back to the Thailand presentation again, and may I invite Dr. Heather Allen to perhaps elaborate a bit more about your most important comments or takeaway from this presentation. For example, how to make sure better demographic profiling can be done to help the analysis and action design. Heather, over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry I can't put my video on. It's I've got quite a delicate internet, so I'm not working from home at the moment, working from the office at the moment. So yes, in fact, this is really a question for all the presentations. You know, all of them have to deal with a lot of fragmented, informal actors. When you want them to participate, they're usually quite reticent of coming into any government projects because they are on the informal spectrum. They often think it's all about, well, you want me to pay my tax, you want me to know how much I'm earning. You know, I might not have all my papers, you know, completely in the right order. There's a lot of information that those people feel very vulnerable about. So it would be quite interesting to understand almost all from all of the presentations, if they can, just how they manage to engage those particularly reticent groups, but that this is a really important aspect when it comes to looking at the gender and social aspects. So I'd be very interested if they would like to elaborate a little bit more on that. There would be a lot of learning, I think, in there.
Thank you, Heather. I think towards the end of this session, we can invite the presenters again if there's anything else they'd like to share on the points pointed to by the experts. On this the same presentation from Thailand, I do want to also ask Abraham if you'd like to share anything, knowing that you have worked on participatory process in waste management projects in other countries, in particularly engaging persons with disabilities. Is there anything in particular you'd like to raise at this point?
All right, thank you very much. I think initially my first comment has already been echoed. The process of engaging the vulnerable group determines the kind of information you can obtain for your analysis. It is very important. I think the previous workshop that we did, I shared that in Accra, the informal waste workers have been housed within the waste management department. So they are, in one way or the other, they don't see the authorities as a threat, but the authorities are working with them to champion their welfare. And therefore, they open up on their numbers who is here, how things are done. And you shouldn't, the approach where you have just 2-3 months going on the field, asking questions, making sure, has proven to provide data that sometimes is not reliable. You can have information, but the accuracy and the reliability is one of the things that we have to look at. So as highlighted earlier, the process to obtaining the data for your analysis is very important. also the spatial aspect. I've seen a lot of it, but most of the time, the spatial distribution of your data is also a very critical aspect of what you present. The issue of disability is very, very critical. You have variety of disability. Each project design and how it affects each disability group is different. For example, if you are working in a project that the action has a bearing on the vision, then visually impaired people are the most affected. So then they become your key target. If the project has mobility action, then the persons with mobile challenges become your target group. It doesn't necessarily mean that because you're looking at persons with disability, the entire group, because there are a lot of them that you cannot. But at least when you are able to understand their demographics and the type of challenges that they face, then you are able to see who is likely to be affected by the action that the project seeks to bring on board, and then propose solutions that will enable them undertake the action. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abraham. I think you pointed out the data comments, which is very important for my own experience doing community engagements. For example, if you interview the head of households, you don't necessarily get the actual or the most factual data about women or children or other persons' engagement or persons with disabilities engagement in certain issues. So, and that goes down to the detail in terms of how to design your data collection methodologies and who to interview in particular to suit the purpose of your GEDSI analysis. Thank you for that, Abraham. Let's move on to the Panja City presentation. This is one focusing on stormwater management. So I would like to give the floor to Michaela, perhaps, given your experience on sustainable and climate actions and how to do GEDSI in that front. Is there anything you would like to share about this particular project in India that they can use to improve the project design and implementation? Over to you, Michaela.
Hi, so good afternoon. So I haven't put anything there, but I think generally similar with what Dr. Heather has already said and Abraham, demographic data is really crucial. So adding to that, I think when it comes to stormwater management, I'm not sure if that's a coastal area, but in the Philippines, like in Bacolod City, one of the projects that was highlighted in our initial workshops with them was actually on stormwater management. But given that it's a coastal barangay, you will need to identify first if it's stormwater due to typhoons or flooding due to typhoons or flooding due to saltwater intrusion. Anyway, I think one other important factor would be risk maps. I'm not sure if other countries do that or have implemented that as well. But risk maps where we identify flood risks, stormwater risks, as well as the households currently in that area would be crucial when we do our proposals because we can easily identify where we need to address or where we need to respond during emergencies especially and who are the most vulnerable people or groups in that area.
Thank you, Michaela. I think that's a very valid point. I also see Angelique's hands up. Would you like to say a few things here? Angelique, over to you.
Thank you, Tinting. This is regarding the fact of, the waste management, wherein most of the time it's the women who are involved. And one of the factors that we have seen is that the lack of toilets for them. So when they want to, use the washrooms which are meant for general public in public areas, most of the times they also face violence. So one of the factors that we need to understand is that when we are saying why, how they are affected, we need to also put up the challenges of violence against women and also the gender-based violence. That cannot be omitted when we are talking about inclusion. And the second part is also to look at, especially when we are talking about the stormwater management. I talked about the education of children with disabilities because they are the ones who are left behind all the time. Because education and then with disabilities, so there's no linkages found in many of the countries. So that is something that we need to address. And I'm sure in other countries like India, we do not have accessible shelters. So the previous speaker just talked about risk mapping. I think it is also important to see that in the risk mapping, we do put all these criteria so that these are very essential points and they should not be left out of the entire planning process. Thank you.
Thank you, Anjali. And if you may stay, I do want to also invite you to share your comments a bit more about the presentation from Indonesia by Ibu Mona, because they do place a lot of emphasis to, for example, persons with disabilities. And of course, there are other three groups that identify older persons, women and children. So how do you think in the project design and implementation, they can see to the actual and unique needs of these different groups, and also to make sure they treat it in the project process, not only as beneficiaries, but also actors with agency? Anjali, if you may also, would you like to also share your feedback on in this regard?
I just missed the last point, Ting Ting, because there was some glitch here. Yeah, if you can, sorry.
Sure. I just wonder if there's anything you want to say about the Indonesia project, especially how there are 4 different groups identified as the targets, stakeholders to engage, persons with disabilities, older persons, women and children, how to make sure that not only the differentiating needs are identified, but also they're treated as actors with agency throughout the process, not only as beneficiaries. That was my question for you.
Absolutely. So this is, I think it goes for all the presenters that we need to have all groups like children, women, people with disabilities, and also people from different age factors as well, because senior citizens are also left out of the discourse and dialogue. So having them into the planning, into the risk mapping, in what kind of emergency warning systems that needs to be provided, because children might not be able to understand those signals which are meant for adults. So it's good to ask them and get their opinion on that, and what is the system that works well for them. So strategizing for each group and asking them, putting them in different focus group discussions, and then consolidating it, and then going back to them once the kind of disasters happen or the kind of flooding which happens. Reviews are very important. So most of the time when the policies are made, there's no such strategy for getting the reviews or complaints or suggestions. So having them on board from point A to point Z, and it's a dynamic process. So that has to be kept in mind. It will really help.
Thank you, Anjali. I think you pointed to a very important part in the whole GEDSI conversation, which is about what can be done to enable meaningful participation, because participation does not happen naturally. For example, for persons with disabilities, you probably need to consider accessibility support, reasonable accommodation. Like for this workshop, we provide international sign language interpretation. And what are the support you will need to provide in order for them to be able to be there and participate. And it's the same for women. The timing of your consultation, is it convenient for the particular group of women you want to engage? And for children, as Anjali, you pointed out, what kind of questions can be tailored so that they can actually provide sensible feedbacks? Those are the kind of details you probably want to consider to make sure that GEDSI does not just stay in your planning and your project documents, but actually implementable. We still have a few more minutes for the feedback session. I would like to give the floor to Astrid, because I think for all three presentations, and I'm sure it's the same for the other projects under this program, there's always the financing and budget allocation dimensions. Is there anything you would like to share about how to make sure you can use financing to put these plans into action or sustain the solutions that are already developed? Over to you, Astrid.
Thanks so much, Ting, and thanks to all the presenters who gave very great overviews of their project. I think my main point around financing, and I think I elaborated a little bit in the Indonesia, or I put a post-it. By the way, sorry, it took me a while to figure out how to do the post-its, which is why they got more as it went on.
Okay.
But unfortunately, resources are limited, right? We only have so many resources to go around. And so prioritization is really important. What do you start with? How do you start with? How do you decide what you start with, right? And I think particularly in the project from Indonesia, which seems to be a very broad and wide-ranging project, you have to be able to narrow that down and be able to understand where you can put your resources first. That in and of itself is already a decision that requires participation, input, what are the short-term needs versus the medium versus the long-term needs. The second thing I'll say is the prioritization also comes in, and I put this comment in a couple of places. We sometimes run the risk of, when we talk about GEDSI, of saying, women, person with disabilities, marginalized groups. And actually, in the end, that's actually the majority rather than the minority, right? But actually, what we're talking about, or what we mean, is within these groups, there are people who are more vulnerable than other, right? So it's not all women who are already vulnerable. There are also women who are in higher income settlements, who have more agency and more voice. And so I think when it comes to also prioritization, it's important that we narrow down who we're talking about and who we're talking to and who we're planning with, beyond the sort of overarching groups, because otherwise you risk making your projects too big and unmanageable, and avoid or are not able to do the targeting that you intend to do with the project itself.
Thank you, Astrid. I think that's, again, a super valid point. What to prioritize and how to prioritize it. It also involves a participatory process if you want to do it properly. I think now we can open the floor for everyone to join the discussion. We'll have until 2:20 Bangkok time. Here's how I would suggest that we use the time we have. I'll first invite up to 3 questions or comments from the participants. If there is time, I can give the floor to more. Then I will invite the experts or the presenters to respond to your questions if necessary. Following that, Astrid has also kindly agreed to share some more reflections in terms of what to do and not to do when it comes to GEDSI in your projects. And the final part of this session, depending on how much time we have left, we can go to the questions we have not been able to address from the first workshop on August the 6th, I believe, and then we cover as much as possible during the time we have. So now, may I know if there's any questions or comments from the participants? Please feel free to raise your hands, and I can see that Lisa has shown the screen with questions from the participants. You can still raise your hand and speak up so that we can have a bit more interactions. Otherwise, I will have to pick and choose from whatever posted. I don't see any hands, so I try to review the questions. And my picks are going to be random, I'm sorry. One question for India. What is your experience using risk mapping to identify the target groups? I wonder if the 2 presenters from India would like to respond to this question.
Yeah, in terms of risk management, we have done a vulnerability analysis, like basically vulnerability analysis with how we have identified the target groups, and also we have done vulnerable areas. We have certain vulnerable areas to that, which have been related to urban flooding. One vulnerability analysis and risk mapping we have done it also. With the household survey, we have started on that.
Mm. Thank you, Denise. I can tell that some of the questions, for example, prioritization, how to engage informal groups, they are more or less answered by Heather and Astrid just now. So we probably won't go into those questions just yet. Oops, there's so many questions. I think some of these questions, if I'm not mistaken, they're from the previous workshop too. So perhaps I'll just go into them already. For example, this one about in the current geopolitical environment, how can countries prioritize social aspects of development so as to also address the climate finance crunch globally? Astrid, do you want to take this question, and then we can see if any of the other experts would like to share your feedback too? It's a broad question about how to prioritize.
Yeah, so actually, interestingly enough, and this is, there's a World Bank publication that just came out. It's called Banking for Cities, and I worked on, I think, chapter 4. And so as part of chapter 4 of that publication, we did some analysis on the supply and demand for climate finance. And actually, the interesting finding is that there's more climate finance in the world than there is currently demand, in terms of there is demand, but that demand is not being translated into projects that then financing can finance, right? So it's this sort of bankability pipeline. So I wouldn't even say that there's a global finance crunch. It's a mismatch between what finance wants to finance and what projects are out there and what projects are prepared. I think the current geopolitical environment, however, is really important to flag, because I think whilst the climate finance is there, unfortunately, the geopolitics has made GEDSI has deprioritized GEDSI considerations. Again, we're back in I think a couple of years ago, GEDSI considerations were very high on the agenda. What I'm hoping is in the current discussions of what's going to happen post SDGs, that takes a much more central role again, because whatever the global agenda is that we countries agree to sort of drives the priorities also when it comes to many of these financing decisions. In absence of that, or in waiting for that, I think it's really important for countries themselves to put forward these considerations within their projects, right? Climate finance is there, it's looking for projects. And so there is negotiation space to be able to do that, right? So if you can make the same things I was discussing last workshop, if you can make the bankability, you can make the numbers work. You can also put in your own demands as well in terms of GEDSI. And I think so it's very important that those putting forward the project step up in this area.
Thank you, Astrid. May I quickly check with Astrid for now? Is it okay that if we ask you to share the do's and don'ts towards the end of the session, since now we already have a whole range of very interesting questions to answer? I will try to leave you 5 minutes for that, if that's enough.
Sure.
Okay, great. Yeah, I can tell there are even more interesting, more and more questions coming up. I found one very interesting. How can we address the discomfort of the aging population with technology as we move towards smart cities in the Asia Pacific region? This is the region with a rapidly aging populations. That is super relevant. I think perhaps if I can give this question to Heather, and if possible, Angelique can also share your feedback. So to Heather first, if you're ready. Otherwise, Angelique, you can go ahead.
So I think clubbed with the aging challenges and also the disabilities, which are some of the hidden disabilities that comes over with aging population, In the smart cities indicators in our region, we don't find such indicators to look at how these challenges are mitigated. So what we think is important that again the dialogue with them and their requirements specifically related to age, and then again cross-cutting for women and people with disabilities who are aging, it is important. And technology can work wonders, but it has to be easy to use, accessible. Technology apps are many numbers, in numerous ways we are using apps. So something which is easy to use, which connects, and also which is adapted for local languages. So there might be option of translation of local languages in different scenarios in the country, will also help them in accessing these challenges. And also the discomfort is about the technology, because many people with aging processes are not tech savvy. So as I said, easy to use, which can be child friendly and age friendly, as well as disabled friendly also.
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Anjali.
I can probably just add a little bit of
please, Heather.
See that? Sorry, I couldn't get my mic on quick enough. So it was fine.
That's all right.
One thing I would just like to highlight to all the projects, in fact, around the aging population, is the different generations between the researchers and the population you're actually dealing with. And I'd just like to highlight that it's really important to invest in getting the researchers themselves to understand what the issues are and how to phrase the questions to an aging population to get the right answers. Because very often I have seen, that there is a big gap between what the younger generation imagine are issues for the older generation, what the older generation actually face as issues, and how these can be put into what has already been prepared by the researchers. There's often a lot of discontinuity in that, so that would be something that I would just offer as an area to really invest in when you are looking to make sure that the aging population, of which we do have to take a lot of attention now, because particularly in the Asia Pacific area, it's a very important community. So I just want to highlight that in my experience, that it's a very important point.
Indeed. Thank you, Heather. Actually, my next question is also for you, if you don't mind. While designing public transport in an established city like Bangkok, GEDSI inclusion can be challenging, considering, for example, the land crunch. How would you suggest that this issue can be addressed?
So here I'm going to be maybe a little bit provocative. I don't think designing public transport is any more difficult than waste management or any of the other public services. It's not so complex. What is complex is the rigidity in the transport engineers, the economists, the people who design transport, the urban planners. They have a very, very rigid kind of framework that they're used to using, and they find it very, very difficult to open their minds to a GEDSI approach. I think that it's I really like the 4 R's. I think it can be applied very well. But when you're dealing with public transport, you do have to invest in the who. So you do need to make sure that you have quantitative statistics and information. But if you don't invest in the qualitative side, then it will not be an inclusive system. And that is something that in large public transport projects, you have usually very small budgets for the qualitative side, which is the wrong way around. You have a very large investment in household surveys, but you do need to really invest in the different groups. You need to invest also in the centers of interest of these different groups, because it's not all about taking people to jobs that are formal jobs. It's actually about making the city work. So that's what I would say as being the real challenges when you're looking to design an inclusive public transport system.
Thank you, Heather. I think I would like to go to one or two more questions for the presenters before I then come back to perhaps one more question for the experts. The next question is for Thailand, to Ms. Thammasane. What process for collecting data you have used in your projects in Hai City? Over to you, Ms. Thammasane, if you're here.
Yes. Okay, for correct data, we have a survey, we have a team for survey. Yes, and we have a department of social, how to call it? Social department. We have a correct data by survey, and we knock, we have a project knock the door, yeah, to correct data. We know what is the about the gender, what is the age of the people. Yes, something.
Thank you. I see another interesting, slightly long but interesting comment / question from the participants. People from different groups and age, and is to the bottom left. Yes, thank you. People from different groups and age need to be included when deciding on emergency systems. How this is strategized for each group, and do you use focus groups and then consolidate the information collected? Reviews, complaints, and suggestions are also equally important and should be kept in mind. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this might be a question for the India presenters. If the two of you would like to say a few things, or anybody who have thought about this in your respective project can also respond. If not, we can always come back to this later in writing. And then before I give the floor to Astrid, I think we can have one more question to be answered by the experts, which it goes to the fundamental of why and how to do GEDSI, I think. What do you think is more important for efficient GEDSI inclusion in city? Is it social education since the beginning of the project? Is it going to be top-down approach to force to impose GEDSI inclusion? Michaela, do you like to go first? And then let's see if Heather or Abraham would like to add anything you may want to say about this.
Yes. I think first, before education should be a black and white. So we need to make sure that our initiatives are put to policies or programs of the city, because usually leaders or politicians will be changed every so and so term. So when a new leader is elected, there are new priorities as well. So if you want sustainability to the initiative, we always need to make sure that it is written in black and white. Following that, planning processes, as have been highlighted throughout the workshop, we need to be as inclusive, as participatory as possible. So given that cities have multiple stakeholders, so we need to always take note that they are involved in not only at the presentation of the proposal, but the initial development of the initiatives.
Thank you, Michaela. How about Heather and Abraham? Is there anything you'd like to add about this?
Certainly, I'd just like to feed back into what Astrid reminded us, that we are in a new era of GEDSI actually slipping down the political agenda again. And I really think it's important to make sure that, as Ella said, we need to make those feedback loops into what has already been agreed years ago, maybe 3 to 5 years ago. There's a city development plan, there's the sustainable development goals. There are all these very important and ambitious frameworks that we can make that loop back to make sure that people say, oh, you know, it's no longer important. No, it is still incredibly important, and we need to make sure that it really resonates still, because I do think that we're going to face quite a lot of backlash in the next 3 to 5 years, and GEDSI may well risk slipping down the political agenda again, which would be a real backward step in my view, obviously.
Thank you, Heather. And I was planning to ask Abraham, but sorry, I do see one hand up. Lisa from GIZ India. Maybe it's sensible to give you the floor before we have to move to Astrid. Over to you, Alisa.
Thank you so much. And this is a very interesting question. The top-down approach to forced GEDSI inclusion. The reason I'm trying to highlight it here is that GEDSI is generally the minority. So even if it becomes a bottoms-up approach, the minority voice is generally suppressed. So maybe the onus is on the top-down approach so that inclusion happens in the long term. But really great question. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that resonates with something we always want to bear in mind. Do not treat GEDSI concerned populations as minorities, and also try not to consider them as vulnerable populations, but rather every one of us, different groups are facing different kind of challenges. I think it's better to focus on the challenges and barriers we need to address than considering that these groups altogether are vulnerable. So that's something might shape the way we tailor solutions. And Abraham, if you could share your comments very quickly before we will need to ask Astrid to share her parts. Over to you, Abraham.
All right, thank you very much. I think based on my experience, if we treat GEDSI as usually a project component, then that becomes a big issue. Then it becomes a person situation where you have a project, it is designed, and already you begin to get a pushback. But when it is seen by either local authorities, when it is seen by the society, as these are either groups that we live with, and then we all need to come together because everybody has a need. So we do not have to prioritize our interests, but make sure that everybody's voice or the needs of all parts of our society is heard. Then that becomes critical. I would always use the example of what we have here in Accra. Permit me if I take a bit of your time. If you look at the informal waste workers, most of them are people, education-wise, a bit not up there in terms of formal education. A little bit of them are on drugs. And I say, if you do not support these people, build them, provide them some source of livelihood, when there are issues of community violence, these are the people that jump onto such situations most of the times. So when we begin to see the situation as not a project demand, but it's a societal demand that we need to address, then we forget about top-down approach and education or whatsoever. We include it as part of everything that we do in our daily city planning in our systems. Then that is what we can make the needed changes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abraham. Now let's give the floor to Astrid to share with us some do's and don'ts, I think, which will be a nice wrap up of the feedback session. Over to you, Astrid.
Thank you, Tintin. So I was asked to potentially to think about some do's and don'ts when it comes to GEDSI. And obviously, given my background, this is very biased towards the urban finance. And so what I thought I would do is draw a little bit more on what I said in the last workshop and sort of illustrate it with examples to be able to highlight what I mean. So the first, and I think the biggest message to come out of this is don't assume that if you make something green and climate resilient, that is necessarily going to bring inclusion. And that is especially, as I said, because finance is not neutral. So let's take, for example, mitigation. And let's take, for example, a public transport project, which I'm sure Heather could speak to a lot better than I can. But BRTs, bus rapid transit systems, are, for example, a project that are often financed or can access green financing, green loans. And, you know, one assumes because you're building a public transport system that this is going to be more inclusive for the city. But we have now, unfortunately, a growing body of evidence that it's not necessarily the case. Because if you remember what I said last time, loans need to be repaid. And so what happens is in the design of BRTs, for example, in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, the prioritization of the first routes was done not to the areas that were the poorest in the city and who would have most benefits from having a public transport system and the connectivity, but actually to richer areas of the city, because the fare box, what you could collect as fares would be higher and you needed to repay the loan. Similarly, in Cape Town in South Africa, when it came to figuring out how the loan was going to repay, the fare that then needed to be charged excluded a lot of poorer people in the city. So the don't assumption is don't assume just because you are now looking at public transport and green that you're going to actually be inclusive. The do piece here is, for example, how Bogota in Colombia did it, which is that they have subsidies for low-income groups, which you have to apply for. And actually, when they did some research afterwards, they found that one of the biggest beneficiaries of these subsidies are women-headed households, because they tend to fall into the low-income groups as well, right? So again, this is the power of putting the power of the public back in and being able to regulate around this. Similarly with adaptation projects. So again, we assume particularly that adaptation is going to be more inclusive. And I mentioned last time, you know, adaptation is usually grant financing, so you don't have the stress of repaying the loan. But what happens when you do urban greening or flood protection, or in the case of the example we just had from India, stormwater, is that once you've adapted a place, the land values of that place increase and the attractiveness of that place increases. And so green gentrification can happen. It can push out more vulnerable populations. This has happened, for example, in Medellin in Colombia, where they put trees along the riverbanks. They invested in urban green public space, and property speculation then meant that informal settlements were pushed out. Again, I think one of the most interesting examples is stormwater improvements that were done in Cape Town. And then developers came and actually started advertising luxury housing as climate proof, right? So it became a way then to bring in luxury housing. So again, with adaptation efforts, what you need to do is you need to combine them, you know, to avoid the sort of gentrification effect that comes because you've now adapted a place, with regulations, for example, around inclusionary rezoning, and particularly with places that are tenure insecure, anti-eviction safeguards and things like that, right? So you cannot just assume because you've now gone to adaptation, because you've had grant financing, you're not repaying the loan, that it's going to be inclusive. You have to go a step further. Finally, the final example I want to say is regulation. So I mentioned a lot about regulation being something that governments have the power to do, and is a good way to mitigate some of these efforts, mitigate some of these challenges. But you also have to be careful with regulation. So one regulation that comes a lot in the climate space is green certification. So, you know, particularly around buildings, right? And now more and more around housing. And so when you have green building certification, it shows that it's energy efficient, resource efficient, water efficient. But what we forget is that that costs money, and that if you don't have, again, extra regulation in place, that the developers will pass it back on to the renters or to the potential buyers, which again will increase the cost of the building and price people out. And this, again, there is evidence, the project in Kenya where they created green certification, and they realized that complying with the certification costs was nearly a quarter of what the costs of the building costs were. And so it's, once that's passed on down the line, then the affordability of the housing stock in this case goes up. So again, you have to be careful, and you have to, when you plan your regulations, plan them with understanding what the price implications are and who that's going to impact, and try and build in safeguards around that. And so I guess my biggest do when it comes to urban climate finance, is that if we're going to do urban climate finance and GEDSI, we need to view it holistically. We can't assume because we're doing something good for the climate, it automatically is going to be inclusionary. Rather, we need to not only finance green, but we need to finance for inclusion and regulate for inclusion and dignity as well.
Okay, thank you so much, Astrid. We're slightly over time, but I think these real-world scenarios you share are super relevant to all of us. I'll now hand over to Mr. Siri Lanusti, the founder of Tofu Creatives, who will walk us through the graphic recordings she's worked out as a summary of the key takeaways. Over to you, Siri.
Thank you, Ting Ting. Hi, everyone. So here's just a quick visual journey from today's session. So from the panel in Thailand, we looked at their work on the Resource Recovery Center and the informal waste workers, community leaders, also considering the policy and governance failures that happened. And for some of the reforms that they did were like equitable fee structures, scaling up local successes, prioritizing a safe and clean system through safeguards. And for India, with the stormwater management system, some measures that they considered were having urban flooding mapping, having household surveys, creating green-blue infrastructure, and having participatory processes. And for Indonesia, looking at including it in the Vision 2025 to 2030, making plans disability, elderly, child, and women friendly, and having stakeholder involvement in the process. And over to the feedback panel, we had these questions from Thailand, India, and Indonesia in the Miro board as a reference. But from the panelists, we heard about the importance of data collection, looking at demographic data, asking about risk maps, considering gender-based violence, having feedback loops on agreements, looking at emergency warning system per different group, how prioritization requires participation, how it's important to make projects bankable, and last on Astrid's point on how it's so important to make finance and regulations holistic. So that's a big picture for today's session. This is a work in progress, and the organizers will share it to you when finalized. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think Lisa will wrap up.
Thank you so much, Ting Ting. Thank you so much, Desiree. In the last couple of minutes that we have left, we would really, really appreciate your feedback. You can see this on your screen now, the QR code, and hopefully the link will be shared with you also in the chat. It will only take a couple of minutes, and we really appreciate that feedback from you. Just a couple of updates as well before we go. We still have 2 self-paced e-learning courses that are still available for you to enroll at any time. These will also be translated into Bahasa Indonesia and Thai. These will be available soon, so keep an eye out for those. We also have our next e-learning course, which is module 5, integrating climate data with spatial planning. That's going to launch in September. So we really hope to see some familiar faces there as well. And after consultation with some of the country teams, or with all of country teams, sorry, we have a final synthesis workshop that is actually going to move from December to early 2026. So we'll be sharing a few more details on that with you very, very soon. We'll also share the links to the quiz that those of you who didn't quite manage to finish that, so that you can go ahead to that. And before we say goodbye, I want to say a massive thank you to all of you for joining. Also to our wonderful interpreters, Kun Araya, Razak, and Britta. Thank you so much for ensuring smooth communication throughout. Desiree for the beautiful graphic recordings that capture today's discussion so creatively, and our fantastic experts and country representatives. for sharing so much of your knowledge and expertise with us. Thank you so, so much. And a very, very quick last note, certificates for those who have attended will be issued. And any resources that we have been using, all the slides, everything like that, that's all in our Google Drive, and the link is shared with you here in the chat. That's all that is left from me. Thank you so much again, everybody, and hope to see you soon for the next module.
Sorry, let's take a group picture before we close today's session. If everybody could turn on the camera. Yeah, everybody's like fixing their hair. And Jan, if you could do that for us.
Yep, sure.
You tell us when to smile.
Okay.
Britta, could you please
2,
come on the
1.
picture?
Okay, one more. 3, 2, 1. Okay.
Perfect.
Yep.
Thank you so much, everybody. Looking very beautiful. See you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much, everyone.